The scream tore through the trees before Mara even saw the danger. She dropped the basket of herbs she was carrying and spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. Something enormous crashed through the undergrowth behind her, branches snapping like dry twigs. She did not wait to see what it was. She ran. Her feet pounded against the damp forest floor, roots grabbing at her ankles, the cold air burning her lungs. She had been warned never to wander this deep into blackthorn territory alone, but the rare moonflower she needed for Livia's medicine only grew near the old stone well, and she had thought she could slip in and out before anyone noticed. Now she regretted every step. A shadow moved between the trees ahead of her, blocking her path. She skidded to a stop, chest heaving. The shadow stepped into a patch of pale moonlight, and Mara's breath caught. It was not the creature chasing her. It was a man, tall and broad, his eyes glowing faintly amber in the dark. She recognized him instantly, even though she had never stood this close to him before. Alpha Cade, the most powerful wolf shifter in the entire Northern Territory, ruler of a pack so feared that other packs paid tribute just to avoid his anger. "Get behind me," he said, his voice low and commanding, cutting through the panic clouding her mind. She obeyed without thinking, pressing herself against a tree trunk, as he turned toward the sound crashing through the brush. What emerged was a huge, mangy wolf, easily twice the size of a normal animal, its eyes wild and its jaw dripping. A rogue. Mara had heard stories about rogues, wolves who had lost their minds and abandoned their packs, wandering the wilds and attacking anything that crossed their path. Cade did not hesitate. His body shifted in a blur of motion, clothes tearing, as fur rippled across his skin, and within seconds, a wolf even larger than the rogue stood where the man had been. The two beasts collided with a force that shook the ground. Mara pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from crying out as they tore into each other, snarling and snapping, rolling through the underbrush in a storm of claws and teeth. She had never seen anything like it. She had grown up in a small human village on the edge of packlands, always taught to stay far away from the shifters, to never look them in the eye, to never draw their attention. But here she was, trembling behind a tree, watching the Alpha King fight for her life. The battle ended almost as quickly as it began. Cade's massive jaws closed around the rogue's throat, and after a moment of thrashing, the wild wolf went still. Cade released it, stepped back, and shifted again, his powerful frame reforming into the tall man from before. He was breathing hard, blood trickling from a gash on his shoulder, but he did not seem to notice the wound at all. His eyes found Mara immediately. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, still too stunned to speak. He crossed the distance between them in a few long strides, and crouched down slightly so he was looking at her at eye level, studying her face as though checking for injuries she might not have noticed herself. "What are you doing out here alone?" he asked, and though his voice was still firm, there was no anger in it, only concern. "I needed moonflower," she managed to say. "For medicine. I did not think anyone would notice if I was quick." He studied her for a long moment, and something flickered behind his eyes that she could not quite name. "You are the healer's apprentice, Livia's girl." She nodded, surprised he knew who she was at all. She was only a human living on the edges of pack business, someone most wolves barely acknowledged. Yet here was the Alpha King, kneeling in front of her, looking at her as though she mattered. "You should not be out here without protection," he said. "The woods have been dangerous lately, more rogues than usual." "I did not know," she admitted. "I am sorry. I will be more careful." He rose to his full height again, offering her his hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it, and he pulled her gently to her feet. His grip was warm, careful, nothing like the terrifying stories she had heard about him. "I will walk you back," he said. It was not a question. They moved through the trees together in silence at first, Mara stealing glances at him every few steps, trying to reconcile the fierce warrior she had just watched fight a rogue, with the quiet, patient man walking beside her now. He seemed to sense her staring, because after a while he spoke again. "You do not need to be afraid of me," he said. "I am not afraid," she said quickly, then paused. "Well, maybe a little." A faint, almost surprised smile touched his lips. "That is fair. Most people are." "Does that bother you?" she asked, before she could stop herself. He considered the question seriously, as though no one had ever asked him that before. "Sometimes," he admitted, "it gets lonely. being the thing everyone fears. The honesty in his answer caught her off guard. She had expected pride, or indifference, or the kind of cold authority she associated with pack leaders. Instead, she found something almost vulnerable in the way he said it. They walked on, and slowly the tension in her shoulders eased. He asked her about her work with Livia, about the herbs she gathered, and the illnesses she helped treat, and she found herself talking more freely than she expected, describing the different plants and their uses, the way certain roots could ease fevers, and certain leaves could stop bleeding. He listened closely, asking questions that showed genuine interest, not the polite boredom she often received from others. When they finally reached the edge of the healer's cottage, the small stone building glowing with warm candlelight, Mara turned to thank him. But before she could speak, she noticed something odd. His eyes had gone distant for just a moment, unfocused, as though he were listening to something she could not hear. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he muttered something under his breath. It was not directed at her. It sounded almost like he was talking to himself, or arguing with some other part of his mind. "I know," he murmured, so low it was barely audible even to her keen human hearing. "I am not going to embarrass myself. Just because she is brave does not mean anything." Mara blinked, certain she had misheard. She had always had unusually sharp hearing, sharper than any human she had ever met, something Livia said she had inherited from her grandmother, a woman rumored to have wolf blood somewhere far back in the family line, though nothing had ever been proven. Still, catching random murmured words from someone standing several feet away, words clearly not meant for her, felt impossible, even for her. "Did you say something?" she asked carefully. Cade's expression snapped back into focus, his eyes suddenly sharp again, and a faint flush of color rose in his cheeks that she would not have expected from someone so composed, only moments before. "No," he said quickly, just thinking out loud. "It happens sometimes." She studied him, unconvinced, but decided not to push. "Well, thank you for saving me. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." "You are safe now," he said, his voice returning to its usual steady calm. "Just promise me you will not wander that far alone again." "I promise," she said, and meant it. He nodded once, then turned to leave, but she caught the strange murmur again as he walked away, quieter this time, almost frustrated. "You do not need to say anything else. Just let her go inside." Mara stood frozen at the cottage door, watching his retreating figure disappear into the trees, her mind racing. She was almost certain now that she had heard him correctly both times, and that meant either he was talking to himself out of pure exhaustion and adrenaline from the fight, or something far stranger was happening. She remembered the stories Livia had told her once, half joking, about the bond between a wolf shifter and the wolf inside them. How some of the older tales described it, almost like two separate minds sharing one body, sometimes even arguing with each other. She pushed the thought aside as impossible and stepped inside the cottage, her heart still pounding, though now for entirely different reasons than the rogue attack. Livia looked up from her work table, immediately noticing the torn hem of Mara's dress and the dirt smudged across her cheek. "What happened to you?" Livia demanded, rising quickly. "A rogue," Mara said. "In the woods, the Alpha saved me." Livia's eyebrows shot up. "The Alpha King himself? Walked you home?" Mara nodded, still distracted by the strange murmuring she had overheard, unsure whether to mention it. It sounded too strange, too impossible, and she did not want Livia to think she had hit her head during the chaos. "You look pale," Livia said, guiding her to a chair. "Sit. Tell me everything." Mara sat, and as she recounted the attack, the fight, the walk home, she left out the two strange murmurs, tucking them away in her mind, like a secret she was not ready to examine too closely. But even as she answered Livia's questions and drank the calming tea her mentor pressed into her hands, she could not stop replaying his words. "Just because she is brave does not mean anything. You do not need to say anything else, just let her go inside." Whoever, or whatever, he had been talking to, it had clearly been about her, and despite every warning she had ever received about the dangers of pack leaders, despite the fear that still lingered in her chest from the rogue attack, she found herself far more curious than frightened, wondering what exactly the fearsome Alpha King had been arguing with himself about, and why the answer seemed to matter to him so much. That night, long after Livia had gone to bed, Mara lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small room, turning the encounter over and over in her mind. She told herself it meant nothing, that exhausted men muttered strange things after difficult fights, that she was simply imagining more than was there. But some small, stubborn part of her refused to let it go, a part that kept replaying the surprised, almost embarrassed look on his face when she had asked if he had said something. She did not know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. A secret she would soon discover went far deeper than a few muttered words in the dark, one that would change the way she saw the most feared man in the territory forever. 3 days passed before Mara saw Kate again, and in that time she almost convinced herself she had imagined the entire strange exchange. She threw herself into her work with Livia, grinding herbs, boiling tinctures, tending to the small stream of villagers who came to the cottage with coughs and cuts and aching joints. It was easier to focus on measuring exact portions of feverfew than to dwell on the memory of amber eyes and murmured words meant for someone else entirely. But on the 4th day, a messenger arrived at the cottage, requesting Livia's presence at the pack hall to treat one of the older wolves, suffering from a stubborn infection that refused to heal on its own, even with a shifter's usual quick recovery. Livia, her hands full with a batch of tea that could not be left unattended, turned to Mara without hesitation. "Take my bag and go in my place," she said. "You know the treatment as well as I do. Change the dressing, apply the salve, and report back to me on how it looks." Mara hesitated. The pack hall was the heart of Blackthorn territory, the grand stone building, where Cade held court and made decisions for hundreds of wolves. She had been there only a handful of times before, always in Livia's shadow, never on her own. "I can send someone else," Livia offered, noticing her apprentice's uncertain expression. "No," Mara said quickly, straightening her shoulders. "I can do it. I will go." She gathered the bag of supplies and made her way through the village, toward the looming stone structure at its center, her mind churning, with a mixture of nerves and something she refused to name as anticipation. She told herself she only hoped to avoid running into the Alpha at all, that it would be far simpler to slip in, treat her patient, and slip back out unnoticed. The pack hall was busier than she expected, wolves moving briskly through its wide corridors, some in human form and some choosing to remain in their fur even indoors, tails swishing as they passed. A young guard directed her toward the healing quarters, a quiet wing near the back of the building, reserved for injuries too serious to treat elsewhere. She found her patient, an older wolf named Garrick who served as one of Cade's most trusted advisors, resting on a low cot with his leg bandaged and propped up on a cushion. He greeted her with a tired but friendly smile as she approached. "Livia's apprentice," he said. "I remember you from the Harvest Festival last year. You make excellent tea." "Thank you," Mara said, setting down her bag and beginning to unwrap the old bandage carefully. "How is the leg feeling?" "Better than it looks," Garrick said, though his grimace, as she peeled back the last layer, suggested otherwise. The wound beneath was an angry red, clearly infected, though thankfully not as severe as she had feared. She worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound, applying the salve Livia had prepared, and wrapping fresh bandages around his leg, while Garrick made easy conversation about pack gossip and upcoming festivals. She found herself relaxing in his company, grateful for someone who did not look at her the way most wolves did, with either suspicion or indifference. She was just finishing the final wrap when she heard footsteps approaching down the corridor, familiar and heavy, and her stomach tightened before she even looked up. Cade appeared in the doorway, still dressed in the dark clothing befitting his rank, his expression immediately shifting from businesslike focus to mild surprise when he spotted her. "Where is Livia?" he asked, though his eyes lingered on Mara, a beat longer than the question required. "Busy with a tea preparation," Mara answered, tying off the last bandage. "She sent me instead. I hope that is acceptable." "Of course," he said, stepping fully into the room. "Garrick, how does it feel?" "Much improved," Garrick said, testing his leg with a small flex. "Your apprentice healer has steady hands, Alpha." Cade's gaze flicked to Mara again, and this time she caught the faintest shift in his expression, something almost pleased. "I have heard as much," he said simply. Mara busied herself packing away her supplies, trying to ignore the warmth spreading across her cheeks. She told herself it was only the satisfaction of a job well done, nothing more, though she was fairly certain that explanation was not entirely honest. As she gathered the last of her things, Garrick excused himself to test his leg by walking a slow lap around the room, leaving Cade and Mara alone near the doorway. An awkward silence stretched between them, neither quite finding the right words, until Cade cleared his throat. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for treating Garrick so quickly. He is important to me." "It is my job," Mara said simply. "I am glad I could help." He nodded, but did not move to leave, and Mara found herself standing there a moment longer than necessary, waiting to see if he would say anything else. When he remained silent, she gathered her bag and made to step past him toward the door. "Wait," he said suddenly, and she paused, turning back to look at him. For a moment he seemed to search for the right words, his jaw tightening slightly, as though wrestling with something internally. Then, so quiet she almost missed it entirely, he murmured under his breath, his gaze drifting briefly to the side as though listening to some voice only he could hear. "No, I am not going to ask her that. It is completely unnecessary." Mara's breath caught. There it was again, that same strange, distracted muttering, words clearly not meant for her ears, but somehow reaching them anyway with perfect clarity. This time she was certain she had not imagined it. Her heart began to pound, though not from fear this time. "Ask me what?" she said before she could stop herself. Cade's eyes snapped back to her, wide with obvious alarm. "What?" "You said something," she pressed gently, watching his composed expression crack ever so slightly. "About asking me something." "I did not say anything," he said, a little too quickly, his voice carrying the faintest edge of panic that seemed entirely out of place on someone so powerful and controlled. Mara studied him carefully, and slowly, a suspicion began to form in her mind, one so strange she almost dismissed it immediately. Could it be possible that she was somehow hearing him think, or rather, hearing him speak silently to something within himself? She remembered again the old stories Livia had told her, about the wolf and the man sharing one body, sometimes conversing like two separate people trapped together. "Alpha," she said carefully, "are you always this quiet, or do you often talk to yourself?" His face flushed a deep red, and for the first time since she had met him, the powerful, composed Alpha King looked entirely flustered, like a much younger man caught doing something embarrassing. "I do not talk to myself," he said, his voice tight. "Then who were you talking to?" she asked, genuinely curious now, though she kept her tone light, teasing even, hoping to ease the sudden tension gathering in the room. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and finally exhaled a long breath, running a hand through his dark hair in obvious frustration. "It is nothing," he said, "truly. Please, do not concern yourself with it." Mara considered pushing further, but something in his expression, a genuine vulnerability, she had not expected to see on someone so feared throughout the territory, made her soften instead. "All right," she said gently, "I will not ask again, but if you ever do want to ask me something, you know where to find me." She left before he could respond, her heart racing the entire walk back to the cottage, her mind spinning with possibilities she barely dared to believe. If her suspicion was correct, if she truly was somehow catching fragments of his private thoughts, or perhaps conversations between him and the wolf inside him, then she had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something no other human she had ever heard of possessed. And whatever those murmured words meant, whatever silent argument he kept having with himself, one thing had become abundantly clear to her during that brief, flustered exchange. The fearsome Alpha King, ruler of Blackthorn territory, was not nearly as composed around her as he wanted her to believe, and for reasons she could not fully explain, that realization filled her with a warmth she had not felt in a very long time. The following days brought Mara back to the pack hall more often than she expected, as Garrick's recovery required regular attention, and Livia found herself increasingly occupied with other patients across the village. Each visit brought a fresh brush with Cade, sometimes only a passing greeting in the corridor, other times longer conversations that left her searching for hidden meaning in every pause and half-finished sentence. She began to notice patterns in the strange murmuring, catching fragments here and there whenever he stood near her for too long, whenever their eyes met a beat longer than necessary. The words were never clear enough to form a complete picture, but certain phrases repeated themselves with startling frequency. Words like careful and patience and do not scare her away, spoken so quietly she doubted anyone without her particular gift could ever hope to catch them. She kept her discovery to herself, unwilling to share something so delicate and uncertain with anyone, not even Livia, who she suspected would either dismiss it as exhaustion or worry endlessly about the implications of an apprentice healer, catching the private thoughts of the most powerful man in the territory. Instead, she carried the secret quietly, turning it over in her mind during long nights, piecing together fragments like a puzzle she was slowly beginning to understand. What she was starting to realize, with a mixture of disbelief and growing warmth, was that the fierce Alpha King everyone feared throughout the northern territories seemed to be entirely, hopelessly flustered by her presence, and doing everything in his power to hide it. The pack hall buzzed with unusual energy on the morning the council gathered to discuss the recent string of rogue sightings, and Mara found herself pressed against the back wall of the great hall, having been asked to stay in case any of the older wolves needed treatment during the long meeting. She had not expected to be noticed at all, tucked away behind rows of seated advisors and warriors, but she quickly discovered that her seat gave her a clear view of Cade at the head of the room, and more importantly, put her well within range of his quiet, private murmurs. The meeting droned on for nearly an hour, discussions of patrol routes and border reinforcements filling the air, when Mara caught the first stray thought drifting from Cade's direction. His expression remained perfectly composed, his voice steady, as he addressed a question from one of his warriors, but beneath that composure, she caught the faint murmur meant only for himself. "She is watching. Do not look at her. Focus on the meeting." Mara pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to smile, and forced her gaze down toward her lap. She had grown rather skilled over the past week at hiding her amusement whenever she caught one of these stray comments, though it was proving increasingly difficult each time. She busied herself organizing the small pouch of bandages she had brought, using the task as an excuse to keep her eyes averted from his direction. The meeting continued, moving through various matters of pack business, until one of the younger warriors, a broad-shouldered man named Nolan, brought up the topic of an upcoming gathering between several northern packs, meant to strengthen alliances heading into the colder months. "We will need a proper delegation," Nolan said. "Perhaps it is time to consider your future, Alpha. The other packs will ask if you have chosen a mate yet. It reflects poorly if you continue to avoid the question." A ripple of murmurs passed through the gathered wolves, and Mara felt her pulse quicken despite herself. She watched Cade's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, his composed expression barely shifting, though she caught the immediate frantic murmur that followed. "Do not react. Do not look toward the back wall. Absolutely do not look at her." Mara nearly laughed, disguising it quickly as a small cough, though she noticed Garrick, seated nearby recovering from his healed leg, cast her a curious glance. She waved off his concern with a small smile and forced herself to keep her attention on her lap rather than risk meeting Cade's eyes, certain that if she did, she would give away the fact that she had heard every word of his internal panic. "The matter of my personal life is not open for council discussion," Cade said aloud, his tone even and firm, giving no indication of the flustered thoughts running beneath the surface. "We will focus on the border patrols for now." The meeting moved forward, but Mara noticed Cade's attention drift toward her more than once over the following half hour. Quick glances he seemed to think went unnoticed, each one accompanied by another quiet murmur that only she could hear. "She has not laughed at me yet. That is a good sign, I think. Why does she keep looking at her lap? Is something wrong with her lap?" Mara's shoulders shook slightly with the effort of holding back her laughter, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, pretending to stifle a yawn. She was beginning to understand, with growing certainty and no small amount of delight, that the terrifying Alpha King everyone in the territory feared was, in fact, remarkably awkward when it came to matters of the heart, and completely unaware that she could hear every uncertain thought running through his mind. When the meeting finally ended and the great hall began to empty, Mara gathered her supplies and made her way toward the door, hoping to slip out quietly, before anyone noticed her lingering amusement. She had nearly made it to the exit when Cade's voice called out behind her. "Mara," he said. She turned, schooling her expression into something neutral, though the corner of her mouth still threatened to curl upward. "Yes, Alpha?" He approached, his usual composed stride carrying him across the emptying hall until he stood before her, close enough that she caught the faint scent of pine and something warmer underneath, something she had come to associate only with him. "Livia mentioned you would know better than anyone." "It is healed well," she said. "He should have no trouble on patrols within a few more days." Cade nodded, though he made no move to leave, and Mara noticed the faint tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flickered briefly toward the departing warriors, before returning to her. "Is there something else you wanted to ask?" she said, unable to resist the small opening, remembering Nolan's comment about the gathering and choice of mate. His expression flickered with something close to alarm, quickly smoothed over. "No," he said, "nothing else. Ask her if she would like to walk in the garden sometime. It is a simple question. Just ask it." Mara bit the inside of her cheek to keep from grinning outright, watching him wrestle silently with whatever internal debate raged beneath his calm exterior. She decided, in that moment, to take pity on him, or perhaps simply to satisfy her own growing curiosity about where this strange, one-sided conversation might lead. "I have always wanted to see the garden behind the pack hall," she said casually. "I have heard it is quite beautiful this time of year." Cade blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in conversation, though something like relief washed over his features almost immediately. "It is," he said. "I could show you, if you would like. When your duties allow, of course." "I would like that," she said, and meant it more than she cared to admit. As she walked away from the pack hall that afternoon, her heart light and her thoughts full of amber eyes and murmured confessions never meant to reach her ears, Mara allowed herself, for the first time, to consider the possibility that this strange secret she carried might not remain a source of quiet amusement forever. Something was shifting between them, subtle and slow, and she found herself looking forward to whatever came next, with an eagerness she had not felt in longer than she could remember. That evening, as she helped Livia prepare a fresh batch of healing salve, her mentor studied her closely across the work table, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You have been smiling more than usual," Livia observed, grinding a handful of dried herbs with practiced ease. "Care to share why?" Mara felt heat rise in her cheeks, quickly focusing her attention on measuring out oil for the salve. "No particular reason," she said, though her voice betrayed her poorly. Livia raised an eyebrow but said nothing further, though the knowing look she gave her apprentice suggested she was not entirely fooled. Mara returned to her work, her mind still lingering on the promised walk through the garden, and the strange, wonderful secret she carried that made even the most powerful man in the territory seem, in the quietest moments, wonderfully, endearingly human. The garden walk had been everything Mara hoped it would be, quiet and unhurried, filled with easy conversation, and the scent of blooming jasmine winding along the stone paths. But word of the Alpha King personally escorting the healer's apprentice through his private garden spread through the pack faster than either of them anticipated, and by the time Mara returned to the cottage the following morning, whispers had already begun to follow her through the village streets. She noticed the change almost immediately. Wolves who had once ignored her presence now watched her with open curiosity as she passed, some offering polite nods, others exchanging quiet murmurs among themselves the moment she was out of earshot. She told herself it was nothing, simple gossip that would fade within a few days, but the attention only grew as the week continued. It came to a head one afternoon, when she returned to the pack hall to check on a young warrior recovering from a training injury, only to find Garrick waiting near the entrance, his expression unusually serious. "A word, if you have a moment," he said, gesturing for her to follow him into a quiet side room, away from the main corridor. Mara followed, her curiosity mixed with a faint sense of unease at his tone. Once inside, Garrick closed the door and turned to face her, his arms crossed. "I consider myself a friend to the Alpha," he began carefully. "I have served him since he was a young man, barely old enough to hold his position. I say this so you understand why I am about to speak plainly." "Of course," Mara said, straightening slightly. "There are wolves in this pack who have noticed you smiling whenever you are near him," Garrick continued. "Some have begun to whisper that you find him amusing, that you laugh at him behind his back, or worse, that you are mocking him in some way, playing games with a man who holds far too much power to be trifled with." Mara's stomach dropped. She had been so careful, or so she thought, hiding her amusement whenever she overheard his flustered murmurs, but apparently not careful enough. "That is not true," she said quickly. "I would never mock him. I care for him a great deal." Garrick studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes searching her face, as though weighing the sincerity of her words. "I believe you," he said finally, though his expression remained troubled. "But belief is not always enough to stop rumors from spreading, and rumors like these can be dangerous, both for your reputation and for his standing among the pack. An alpha who appears foolish in matters of the heart risks losing the respect of his people." "I never meant for anyone to think that," Mara said, her voice tight with genuine concern. "I do not know how to make it stop." "Perhaps it would help if you understood why people find it strange," Garrick said carefully. "The alpha has never shown interest in anyone since taking his position. He has turned away offers from powerful families, ignored the expectations of the council, remained entirely focused on his duties. For him to suddenly walk a garden path with a young healer, and for that healer to seem so amused in his presence, naturally draws attention and speculation." Mara absorbed his words slowly, understanding now the full weight of what her careless smiles had set into motion. She had been so caught up in the delightful secret of overhearing Cade's private thoughts that she had not considered how her reaction might appear to outside observers, who could not possibly understand the reason behind her amusement. "I will be more careful," she promised. "I do not want to cause him any trouble." Garrick nodded, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "I appreciate that. He has enough burdens without adding gossip about his personal affections to the pile. Whatever is between you, and I suspect there is something, would be better served away from prying eyes until you both understand it more clearly." Mara left the conversation with a heavy heart, replaying Garrick's words as she made her way back through the pack hall. She had not considered the weight of being seen with the alpha, had not thought through the consequences her behavior might carry for someone in his position. Determined to correct her mistake, she resolved to be far more guarded during her next encounter with him, no matter how difficult it proved to hide her amusement at his private murmurs. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. As she made her way toward the healing quarters to check on her patient, she nearly collided with Cade himself, who was walking briskly down the same corridor, his expression tense in a way she had not seen before. "Mara," he said, stopping abruptly. Something in his voice sounded different, more guarded than usual, and she wondered if he too had caught wind of the rumors circulating through the pack. "Alpha," she said, keeping her tone carefully neutral, remembering Garrick's warning. He studied her for a moment, and she caught the faint murmur beneath his composed expression, quieter and more troubled than his usual flustered comments. "I heard what they are saying. Perhaps she has been laughing at me all along, and I simply did not want to see it." Mara's heart clenched at the raw uncertainty in his tone, so different from his usual playful embarrassment. She realized, with sudden clarity, that the rumors had reached him as well, and worse, that he seemed to believe them, at least partially. The thought that he might genuinely think she found him foolish, rather than endearing, filled her with an urgent need to correct the misunderstanding immediately. "Alpha, may I speak plainly?" she said, stepping closer despite Garrick's warning still fresh in her mind. He nodded slowly, his guarded expression not shifting. "Whatever you have heard, the rumors are not true," she said firmly. "I have never laughed at you, not once, not in mockery. If I have smiled more than usual in your presence, it is not because I find you foolish, it is because I find you." She paused, searching for words that would not reveal the true source of her amusement, while still conveying her genuine feelings. "I find you endearing, in ways I did not expect from someone in your position." Cade's guarded expression softened slightly, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. "Endearing," he repeated, as though testing the word for sincerity. "Yes," she said simply. "You are not what the stories say about you. You are kind and thoughtful, and far more gentle than anyone gives you credit for. If that makes me smile, it is because I am genuinely happy to know you, not because I am mocking you." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face, as though searching for any hint of deception, and she held his gaze steadily, determined to let him see the truth in her words. Finally, something in his expression eased, the tension melting away into something closer to relief. "I am glad to hear that," he said quietly. "I confess, the rumors troubled me more than I expected. I am sorry if my careless smiling caused you any trouble," she said. "I will be more mindful going forward." "There is no need to hide happiness on my account," he said, and for a moment, something warmer flickered in his eyes. "I would rather have your honest smile than a guarded expression meant only to protect my reputation." The sincerity in his words caught her off guard, and she found herself smiling despite the very caution she had just promised to exercise. He noticed, and something like relief washed visibly over his features, along with the faintest murmur she caught just before he turned to continue down the corridor. There it is. That is the smile I was afraid I had lost. Mara stood rooted in place for a long moment after he disappeared around the corner, her chest warm with an emotion she did not yet have the courage to name. The rumors might continue to circulate, and the pack might continue to whisper, but she found she cared far less about outside opinions now that she understood, with growing certainty, exactly how much her presence seemed to matter to the man everyone else feared. She resolved that evening, as she walked home beneath a sky scattered with early stars, that she would not let gossip or suspicion drive a wedge between whatever was quietly, tentatively growing between herself and the Alpha King. Whatever came next, she intended to face it honestly, guided by the genuine warmth she felt whenever she caught one of his flustered, endearing murmurs, meant for no one's ears, but somehow always finding their way to hers. The great hall was packed shoulder to shoulder for the quarterly council meeting, every seat filled with pack members, eager to hear updates on the territory dispute brewing along the eastern border. Mara had not planned to attend at all, but Livia's supply of bandages had run dangerously low, and word had reached the cottage that several warriors had returned from patrol with minor injuries needing immediate attention. She arrived just as the meeting began, slipping quietly into a seat near the healing station set up along the side wall. The atmosphere in the hall felt heavier than usual, every wolf present sensing the importance of the discussion ahead. A neighboring pack had been pushing their border markers further into Blackthorn territory over the past month, and tensions between the two groups had grown increasingly tense. Cade sat at the head of the room, flanked by Garrick and several senior advisors, his expression carrying the weight of leadership Mara had come to recognize whenever serious matters demanded his full attention. The discussion unfolded methodically, various warriors presenting reports on skirmishes and territorial violations, while Cade listened with the focused intensity befitting his position. Mara busied herself preparing bandages and salves at her station, only half listening to the political details, until a comment from one of the senior advisors caught her attention entirely. "There is another matter that requires addressing," the advisor said. An older wolf named Doran, who Mara recognized as one of Cade's most conservative counselors. "Several pack members have expressed concern that your recent attentions toward the healer's apprentice reflect poorly during a time of territorial tension. A leader's focus must remain undivided when facing potential conflict." The hall fell into an uncomfortable silence, every eye turning toward Cade, who maintained his composed expression despite the pointed comment. Mara felt her stomach twist with anxiety, remembering Garrick's earlier warning about the dangers of gossip spreading through the pack, though she had not expected the matter to be raised so directly during an official council meeting. "My personal affections have no bearing on my ability to lead this pack through territorial disputes," Cade said, his voice carrying the steady authority that commanded respect from everyone present. "I would ask the council to focus on matters relevant to the border discussion." Doran inclined his head in acknowledgement, though his expression remained skeptical, and the meeting continued forward into further discussion of patrol schedules and diplomatic outreach to the neighboring pack's leadership. Mara kept her eyes carefully lowered, focusing on her work, though she could not help the small ache of guilt she felt, knowing her presence had become a point of political contention for him. The meeting stretched onward for another hour, moving through increasingly technical discussions of resource allocation and warrior deployment, when Mara caught the first stray murmur drifting from Cade's direction, quieter and more distracted than usual, as though his focus had briefly wandered from the official proceedings. "She handled that well, but Doran will not let it go easily. I need to speak with her after this, make sure she is not troubled by what was said." Mara's chest warmed at the concern evident even in his private thoughts, grateful that his worry seemed directed toward her well-being, rather than any embarrassment on his part. She continued her work quietly, waiting for an opportunity to catch his eye and offer some small reassurance that she was unbothered by the political tension her presence had created. The moment came sooner than expected, though not in the way she anticipated. A younger warrior stood to present the latest intelligence gathered from scouts along the disputed border, describing troop movements and suspicious activity that suggested the neighboring pack might be preparing for a more aggressive confrontation than previously anticipated. The room's tension ratcheted upward considerably as the warrior detailed potential threats to several outlying villages. Cade listened intently, his expression growing increasingly focused as the briefing continued, and Mara noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared with the weight of responsibility settling over him. When the warrior finished his report, silence hung heavy in the hall, every wolf present waiting for their alpha's response. Cade rose slowly from his seat, his presence commanding immediate attention throughout the room, and Mara found herself holding her breath along with everyone else, anticipating whatever decision he was about to announce regarding the escalating border conflict. But before he could speak, Mara caught an unexpected murmur, low and almost involuntary, slipping through his composed exterior in a moment of genuine stress that seemed to have loosened whatever careful control he usually maintained over his private thoughts. I hope she is not frightened by all this talk of conflict. I should have asked her to wait outside during the difficult portions of this meeting. The murmur, so clearly focused on her well-being rather than the serious matter at hand, caught Mara entirely off guard amid the tense atmosphere of the hall. A small, involuntary laugh escaped her before she could stop it, quickly transforming into a cough as she realized every eye in the vicinity had turned toward the unexpected sound. Cade's gaze snapped immediately to her direction, his expression flickering with surprise and something close to alarm at the sound, clearly unaware of what had actually prompted her reaction. Several nearby warriors exchanged confused glances, and Mara felt her face flush deeply with embarrassment as she attempted to smooth over the awkward moment. "Forgive me," she said quickly, waving a hand near her throat. "Something caught in my throat." "Please, continue." The room's attention slowly returned to the matter at hand, though Mara noticed Doran's skeptical gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than the others, his earlier suspicions clearly not entirely dispelled by her hasty explanation. Cade continued with his address to the council, outlining a diplomatic approach to resolve the border dispute before resorting to more aggressive measures, his voice steady and commanding despite the momentary interruption. When the meeting finally concluded and the hall began to empty, Mara gathered her supplies quickly, hoping to avoid any further attention drawn to her earlier outburst. She had nearly made her escape when Cade's voice reached her from across the room. "Mara, a moment please." She turned, finding him approaching with Garrick trailing a respectful distance behind, clearly intending to grant them a measure of privacy despite remaining within sight of the hall. Cade's expression carried a mixture of concern and curiosity as he studied her. "Are you well?" he asked. That cough seemed rather sudden. "I am fine," she assured him, though she could not entirely suppress the small smile threatening to break through her composed expression, remembering the genuine sweetness of the concern she had overheard moments before her ill-timed laugh. Truly, it was nothing. He studied her a moment longer, clearly unconvinced, but unwilling to press the matter further in the presence of lingering pack members. "The council meeting grew tense," he said instead. "I hope the discussion of conflict did not trouble you." "I am not so easily frightened," she said gently, "though I appreciate your concern." Something in his expression softened at her words, and she caught the faint murmur that followed, warm and relieved despite the serious political matters still weighing on him. "Good. I would not want her carrying worry over matters that are mine to handle. Thank you for asking," she added, hoping the sincerity in her voice conveyed how genuinely touched she felt by his consideration, even if she could never fully explain the depth of her understanding regarding his private concerns for her well-being. As she made her way home that evening, Mara reflected on how close she had come to revealing her secret entirely, how easily one poorly timed laugh could have unraveled everything she had carefully kept hidden. Yet despite the near miss, she found herself smiling once more, grateful for the glimpse into a heart far gentler and more considerate than the fearsome reputation surrounding the Alpha King ever suggested to the rest of the world. Autumn settled fully over Blackthorn territory in the weeks that followed, painting the forest in shades of amber and gold, and Mara found herself spending increasing amounts of time near the pack hall, no longer solely for her healing duties but simply for the pleasure of Cade's company whenever their paths crossed. What had begun as awkward, stolen glances and flustered murmurs had grown into something steadier, a quiet companionship built on evening walks and shared conversations that stretched long after her official duties concluded. One crisp evening, as the sun began its slow descent behind the tree line, Cade found her tending to the small herb garden Livia kept behind the cottage, her hands stained with soil as she carefully harvested the last of the season's healing plants before the frost claimed them. He approached quietly, watching her work for a moment, before she noticed his presence. "You have a gift for this," he said, gesturing toward the neatly organized rows of plants. "I confess I know little about herbs beyond what keeps a wound from festering." "It takes years to learn properly," Mara said, brushing dirt from her hands as she rose to greet him. Livia has taught me since I was young enough to barely walk without falling into the flower beds. Cade smiled at the image, settling onto a low wooden bench nearby, as Mara finished gathering her harvest into a woven basket. The easy silence between them felt comfortable now, nothing like the tense, uncertain energy of their earlier encounters, and Mara found herself grateful for how naturally their friendship had grown, despite the unusual circumstances of its beginning. "May I ask you something?" Cade said after a while, his tone carrying a gentleness that made Mara pause and turn toward him fully. "Of course," she said, setting the basket aside and taking a seat beside him on the bench. "Do you find contentment here?" he asked. "Living on the edge of packlands, tending herbs and treating wounds. It seems a quiet life, compared to what many young women might dream of." Mara considered the question seriously, appreciating the genuine curiosity behind it, rather than mere polite conversation. "I have always found peace and healing," she said. "There is something deeply satisfying about easing another person's pain, about watching someone recover who might otherwise have suffered. I would not trade that purpose for anything grander." Cade nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the darkening sky above the tree line. "I envy that clarity," he admitted. "My purpose was decided for me, the moment I was born into this position. I have never had the luxury of choosing whether leadership suited me." "Do you regret it?" Mara asked gently, sensing an unusual vulnerability in his admission. "No," he said after a moment's thought. "I care deeply for this pack, for every wolf under my protection. But sometimes I wonder what my life might have looked like had I been free to choose an ordinary path, free of the weight that comes with holding so much power over others." Mara studied his profile in the fading light, struck by how different this quiet, contemplative man seemed from the fierce warrior she had first encountered, fighting off a rogue wolf in the forest. She thought of all the flustered, endearing murmurs she had overheard over the past weeks, evidence of a heart far more uncertain and human than his imposing title suggested to the world at large. "I think," she said carefully, "that the weight you carry has not hardened you, despite everything. I have seen how gently you treat those under your protection, how much you genuinely worry over their well-being, rather than simply ruling through fear. That says more about your character than any title ever could." Cade turned to look at her fully now, something warm and searching in his amber eyes as he studied her expression in the deepening twilight. "You see me differently than most," he said quietly. "I am not certain I deserve such generous perception." "I see you as you are," Mara said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." The moment stretched between them, charged with an intimacy neither seemed quite ready to name aloud, and Mara felt her heart racing as she waited to see whether he might close the small distance separating them on the bench. She had grown so accustomed to catching his private thoughts that the silence itself felt unusually loud, absent of any murmured commentary from whatever internal debate he might be having in this charged moment. Instead, he reached out slowly, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, tucking it carefully behind her ear, with a tenderness that made her breath catch entirely. "Mara," he said softly, her name carrying weight she had not heard him give it before. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He seemed on the verge of saying something significant, his expression open and unguarded in a way she had rarely witnessed, when a sudden commotion from the direction of the pack hall interrupted the moment entirely. Distant shouting carried through the evening air, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching the cottage. Cade's expression shifted instantly into alert focus, the tender moment between them giving way to the immediate demands of leadership as a young warrior burst into view, breathless from running. "Alpha," the warrior gasped. "Scouts have returned from the eastern border. The neighboring pack has crossed the markers in force. They are moving toward the outlying villages." Cade rose immediately, his entire demeanor transforming into the commanding presence Mara had witnessed during council meetings, though he spared her one last glance before following the warrior back toward the pack hall. "We will finish this conversation," he said, his voice carrying a promise she desperately hoped he intended to keep. "I swear it." Mara watched him disappear into the gathering darkness, her heart still racing from the interrupted intimacy of their moment together, mixed now with genuine worry over the escalating conflict that had pulled him away so suddenly. She gathered her basket of herbs and made her way back inside the cottage, her mind torn between the tender warmth of his touch and growing concern over what dangers this new border violation might bring to the peaceful life she had grown to cherish within Blackthorn territory. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by her window watching distant torchlight flicker through the trees as warriors mobilized in response to the threat. She thought of Cade somewhere among that gathering force, preparing to defend his people once more, and found herself praying quietly for his safe return, surprised by the depth of fear that gripped her at the thought of any harm coming to him. She did not yet fully understand the depth of what had grown between them during these quiet weeks of stolen glances and overheard confessions, but she understood, with sudden and undeniable clarity, that whatever this connection was, it had become far too important to lose now, just as circumstances threatened to test it in ways neither of them could have anticipated. 3 days passed before Cade returned from the eastern border, and word reached the village before he did, carried by returning warriors, who spoke of a tense standoff, resolved through careful negotiation, rather than open conflict. The neighboring pack, led by a leader named Dorian, had agreed to withdraw their forces once Cade personally confronted him at the disputed markers, offering both a firm warning and a reasonable compromise regarding future territorial boundaries. Mara had spent those 3 anxious days assisting Livia with an influx of minor injuries among the warriors who remained behind to guard the village, her mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Cade's safety, despite her best efforts to focus entirely on her work. When news finally arrived that the Alpha and his delegation had returned safely, she felt a wave of relief so profound it nearly brought tears to her eyes. She did not have to wait long to see him again. The following afternoon, a formal gathering was called at the pack hall to celebrate the successful resolution of the border dispute, and as part of the diplomatic agreement, Dorian himself arrived alongside several of his senior advisors to formally seal the new territorial arrangement with Cade before the assembled pack members. Mara attended alongside Livia, tasked with tending to any minor ailments among the visiting delegation, and found herself observing the proceedings from a respectful distance near the healing station. Dorian cut an imposing figure, tall and confident, with a charming smile that seemed to win over most of the gathered wolves as he moved through the hall greeting various pack members with practiced ease. It was during a lull in the formal proceedings that Dorian's attention first landed on her, his gaze lingering with obvious interest as he took in her presence near the healing station. He excused himself from a conversation with several Blackthorn advisors and made his way toward her with confident, deliberate steps. "You must be the healer everyone speaks so highly of," he said, his voice carrying a smooth, practiced charm. "I have heard your skills rival even the most experienced healers among the northern packs." "You are too generous," Mara said politely, though something in his overly confident manner made her instinctively wary. "I simply do what I can to help those in need." "Modesty is a rare quality," Dorian said, stepping closer with an easy smile. "Perhaps you would allow me the pleasure of your company this evening, once these formal matters conclude. I would enjoy learning more about your work, and perhaps you might consider a visit to my own territory sometime, where I understand our healing traditions differ considerably from those practiced here." Mara felt a flicker of discomfort at the forward invitation, uncertain how to politely decline without causing diplomatic offense, given the delicate nature of the newly resolved border dispute. Before she could formulate a suitable response, however, she caught something entirely unexpected drifting from across the hall, a low, sharp murmur carrying a tone she had never heard from Cade before. "She is not available for his attention. Someone needs to make that abundantly clear before I lose my composure entirely in front of the entire assembly." Mara's breath caught at the raw possessiveness in his private thoughts, so different from his usual flustered, endearing murmurs. She glanced up to find Cade watching the exchange from across the room, his expression carefully neutral to any casual observer, but she could see the tension coiled tightly in his shoulders, the barely controlled intensity simmering beneath his composed exterior. "I appreciate the invitation," Mara said carefully to Dorian, choosing her words with diplomatic caution, "but my duties keep me quite occupied here in Blackthorn territory. I rarely have opportunity for travel." Dorian's smile did not waver, though something calculating flickered briefly behind his eyes. "A pity," he said. "Perhaps another time then, once you find yourself with more freedom." He excused himself shortly after, returning to conversation with the other advisors, but Mara noticed Cade's gaze remained fixed in her direction for several long moments afterward, his expression unreadable to most observers, but carrying an intensity she recognized now as barely restrained concern, mixed with something fiercer, something she had not yet seen fully surface in him before. As the formal gathering wound toward its conclusion, Cade found a moment to approach her under the guise of checking on the healing station's readiness for any lingering injuries among the departing delegation. His voice, when he spoke, carried a careful control that did little to mask the tension simmering just beneath the surface. "Did Dorian trouble you?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching her face with unusual intensity. "He was forward," Mara admitted, "but nothing I could not manage on my own." Cade's jaw tightened slightly, and she caught another murmur, sharper still, betraying emotions far more turbulent than his composed exterior revealed to the room at large. I should not feel this strongly over a simple conversation, but the thought of her traveling to his territory, of him courting her attention, makes something within me want to tear the hall apart. The intensity of the possessive thought startled Mara, though rather than frightening her, it sent a warm shiver through her chest, understanding now with sudden clarity the depth of feeling Cade harbored beneath his careful composure. This was not mere flustered affection anymore. This was something far deeper, something that had grown roots over these past weeks of stolen glances and quiet conversations, blossoming into genuine devotion he seemed determined to keep carefully guarded from outside eyes. "You need not worry," she said softly, hoping her words might ease whatever turmoil churned beneath his controlled expression. "I have no interest in traveling anywhere. Dorian's territory might lead." Something shifted in his eyes at her words, relief mingling with an intensity that made her pulse quicken considerably. "Good," he said simply, though the single word carried weight far beyond its brevity. As the delegation from Dorian's pack finally departed later that evening, formal courtesies exchanged and the new territorial agreement properly sealed, Mara found herself lingering near the pack hall entrance, watching Cade oversee the final farewells with practiced diplomatic grace. Once the visiting wolves had disappeared beyond the tree line, he turned back toward her, some of the carefully maintained composure finally slipping from his expression. "Walk with me," he said, and something in his tone told her this invitation carried far more significance than their usual casual strolls through the garden. They walked in silence for a while, the crisp evening air carrying the last scents of autumn before winter's arrival, until Cade finally spoke again, his voice quieter and more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I do not know when this happened," he admitted, "but I find myself unable to imagine the days ahead without your presence in them. Watching Dorian speak with you today, I realized how deeply I have come to care for you, far beyond simple friendship or casual companionship." Mara's heart soared at his admission, though she remained quiet, sensing he had more to say, and wanting to give him the space to finish whatever he had been building toward since their interrupted moment on the garden bench days before. "I have never felt this way about anyone," he continued, his voice carrying an earnestness that touched her deeply. "It frightens me somewhat, how quickly and completely you have become important to me. But I no longer wish to hide these feelings, regardless of what gossip or political complications they might create." "Cade," she said softly, using his name without title for perhaps the first time, "I feel the same. I have for some time now." He turned to face her fully then, hope and vulnerability mingling openly in his expression, and Mara felt the weight of her secret pressing heavily against her heart, wondering how much longer she could continue hiding the true source of her deep understanding of his feelings, and whether the truth, when finally revealed, might complicate everything they had so carefully built between them. The days following their heartfelt exchange beneath the autumn sky brought a new openness between them, though Mara found the weight of her unspoken secret growing heavier with each tender moment they shared. Cade no longer hid his affection behind careful composure, greeting her with genuine warmth whenever their paths crossed, and the pack, sensing the shift in their alpha's demeanor, gradually softened their earlier suspicions into cautious acceptance of the healer's apprentice, who had so clearly captured his heart. Yet despite the growing closeness between them, Mara could not shake the guilt that had settled deep in her chest. Every time Cade spoke sweetly to her, every time she caught one of his flustered private murmurs, revealing thoughts meant only for himself, she felt the dishonesty of her silence pressing more urgently against her conscience. She had listened to his most vulnerable, unguarded moments for weeks now, moments he believed remained entirely private, and the longer she kept this truth from him, the more it felt like a betrayal of the trust steadily building between them. She resolved, one quiet evening as they sat together near the edge of the training grounds watching the last warriors finish their exercises for the day, that she could no longer bear the weight of her secret alone. "Cade," she said carefully, her voice trembling slightly with nervous anticipation. "There is something I need to tell you, something I should have told you weeks ago." He turned to face her fully, his expression immediately attentive, sensing the gravity in her tone. "You can tell me anything," he said gently. "Whatever it is, I promise to listen with an open heart." Mara took a steadying breath, gathering her courage for what felt like the most difficult confession of her life. "I have an unusual gift," she began slowly. "My hearing has always been sharper than most humans, sharper even than I fully understood until recently. Livia believes I inherited it from an ancestor with wolf blood, though nothing has ever been confirmed." Cade listened patiently, waiting for her to continue, his expression curious but not yet alarmed. "The night you saved me from the rogue," she continued, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I overheard something I was never meant to hear. You were talking, very quietly, to something within yourself, arguing, almost, about your feelings toward me." She watched his expression shift rapidly through confusion, then dawning realization, then something closer to horror, as the full weight of her confession settled over him. "You heard my private thoughts," he said slowly, his voice carrying disbelief. "The conversations with my wolf." "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I have heard them many times since that first night, during council meetings, in the garden, even during the gathering with Dorian's delegation. I never sought out this ability deliberately, but once I realized what I was hearing, I did not know how to tell you, without risking everything we had built together." Cade rose abruptly from where they sat, running a hand through his hair in obvious distress, and Mara felt her heart sink at his reaction, fearing the worst had come to pass despite her hopes for understanding. "All this time," he said, his back turned toward her as he processed the revelation, "every embarrassing, uncertain thought I believed remained entirely private. You heard every word." "I am so sorry," Mara said, rising to follow him, desperate to explain herself, before he retreated entirely behind walls of hurt pride and betrayed trust. "I never meant to deceive you. I simply did not know how to reveal something so strange, without risking you thinking me some kind of spy, or worse, without embarrassing you over thoughts you clearly never intended for anyone to hear." Cade turned back to face her, his expression a complicated mixture of emotions she struggled to interpret fully. "Do you understand what this means?" he said slowly. "Every flustered word, every uncertain debate with my wolf about how to approach you, every private moment of vulnerability I believed remained hidden. You witnessed all of it." "Yes," she said softly, bracing herself for whatever anger or hurt might follow. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain, as Cade seemed to replay countless memories through his mind, reconsidering every interaction they had shared in light of this startling revelation. Mara waited, her heart pounding, uncertain whether this confession had just destroyed everything they had carefully built together over these past weeks. Then, slowly, something unexpected began to shift in his expression. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and though confusion still lingered in his eyes, a different emotion began to surface alongside it, something closer to reluctant, disbelieving relief. "You heard everything," he repeated, though his tone had shifted from horrified realization toward something almost contemplative. "Every uncertain thought, every embarrassing moment of hesitation." "Yes," Mara confirmed again, watching him carefully. "Then you already knew," he said slowly, understanding dawning fully across his features now, "exactly how deeply I cared for you, long before I found the courage to admit it aloud. You knew during the council meeting, during our garden walk, during the gathering with Dorian, precisely what I felt, even when I struggled to find the words myself." Mara nodded slowly, uncertain where this realization might lead him. A long moment passed, and then, unexpectedly, something like a genuine, if slightly embarrassed, smile began to tug at the corner of Cade's mouth. "I suppose," he said, "there is a strange comfort in knowing you understood my feelings so completely, even during moments when I could barely admit them to myself. Though I confess, the thought of you overhearing quite so many flustered arguments with my own wolf is rather mortifying." Relief flooded through Mara so completely her knees nearly buckled beneath her. "You are not angry," she said, hardly daring to believe it. "I was startled," Cade admitted, closing the distance between them once more. "And yes, perhaps a measure of embarrassed, imagining just how thoroughly you witnessed my uncertainty. But angry, no. If anything, I find myself oddly grateful that you understood my feelings so clearly, even during the times I struggled to express them properly myself. I should have told you sooner, Mara said, still needing to voice her guilt fully, despite his gracious response. I am truly sorry for keeping this from you as long as I did. You were protecting something delicate, Cade said gently, reaching out to take her hands in his own. I understand the fear of revealing something so strange, particularly something that might have complicated matters between us, before they were ready to bloom fully. I forgive you, Mara, completely and without reservation. Tears of relief pricked at her eyes as she absorbed his gracious understanding, grateful beyond words that her confession had not shattered the fragile, precious connection they had built together. Thank you, she whispered. Though I do hope, Cade added, a teasing warmth returning to his voice now, that going forward, you might find it in yourself to simply tell me things directly, rather than leaving me to stumble through embarrassing private conversations with my own wolf, unaware you were listening the entire time. Mara laughed, genuine and unguarded, relief and joy mingling freely now that the weight of her secret had finally lifted from her shoulders. I promise, she said. No more secrets between us. Not this one, not any other. Cade smiled fully now, pulling her gently closer, and for the first time since their extraordinary journey began weeks ago beside that dangerous rogue encounter, Mara felt the last remaining barrier between them dissolve entirely, leaving only honest, open affection in its place. With her secret finally revealed, and Cade's understanding heart proving far more gracious than she had ever dared hope, Mara found the weeks that followed unfolding with a lightness she had not experienced since first arriving in Blackthorn territory. No longer burdened by the weight of hidden knowledge, she discovered a newfound freedom in her interactions with Cade, able now to respond openly to thoughts he once believed remained entirely private. At first, Cade found himself understandably self-conscious, occasionally catching himself mid-conversation with his wolf, and glancing nervously toward Mara, to gauge whether she had overheard some particular embarrassing admission. But as the days passed and her warm, accepting reactions continued to reassure him, his initial embarrassment gradually gave way to something far more comfortable, a genuine openness between them that neither had experienced quite so completely with anyone else before. One afternoon, as they walked together through the garden that had witnessed so many of their earlier uncertain exchanges, Cade paused near a cluster of late-blooming flowers, his expression thoughtful. I have been considering something, he said slowly, since your confession changed everything between us. What is that? Mara asked, curious at his contemplative tone. For weeks, I struggled to voice my feelings aloud, relying instead on private conversations with my wolf to work through my uncertainty, he said. But now that you already know every uncertain thought I once kept hidden, I find myself wondering why I should continue speaking only to my wolf about matters that concern you so directly. Perhaps it is time I simply spoke my feelings aloud, directly to you, rather than working through them silently first. Mara smiled warmly at this realization, touched by how genuinely he seemed to be growing from their shared understanding. I have rather enjoyed listening to your private thoughts, she admitted with a teasing lilt, but I confess, I would love nothing more than hearing your feelings spoken directly to me as well. Cade laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that had grown increasingly common between them since the walls of his secret embarrassment had finally come down. Then allow me to practice, he said, taking her hands gently in his own. Mara, I care for you more deeply than I ever imagined possible when we first met, beneath such dangerous circumstances. Your kindness, your gentle strength, your remarkable gift that somehow led you to understand my heart before I fully understood it myself. All of it has become essential to my happiness. Mara felt tears of joy pricking at her eyes as she absorbed his heartfelt words, so different from the flustered, hesitant murmurs she had grown accustomed to overhearing. And I care for you just as deeply, she said. I have loved listening to your private thoughts these past weeks, watching you struggle so endearingly with feelings you were not ready to voice. But I love hearing them directly from you even more. As their relationship deepened into this new phase of open honesty, word of their courtship spread naturally throughout the pack, no longer carrying the uncertain whispers of suspicion that had once troubled Mara so deeply. Instead, the pack members, having witnessed their alpha's genuine happiness blossoming alongside the gentle healer's apprentice, began to embrace the match with growing warmth and approval. Garrick, ever the loyal friend and advisor, approached Mara one afternoon, while she assisted with the final preparations for the coming winter season, his expression carrying evident satisfaction at the positive turn of events. "I must admit," he said, settling onto a nearby bench as she organized supplies, "I had my reservations when the rumors first began circulating about your relationship with the Alpha, but watching him these past weeks, I have never seen him so genuinely content. Whatever concerns I once harbored have long since faded." "I am grateful for your honesty from the beginning," Mara said sincerely. "Your warning helped me understand the weight of responsibility that comes with being close to someone in his position." "He needed someone who could see past the title, past the fear others hold for him," Garrick said thoughtfully. "You have given him that, and in return, I believe you have found someone who cherishes you completely, without reservation." Mara smiled, grateful for Garrick's continued friendship and the acceptance he represented from the broader pack community. As autumn gave way to the first frosts of approaching winter, she found herself settling more comfortably into her role within Blackthorn territory. No longer merely the healer's apprentice living quietly on the periphery of pack affairs, but someone increasingly woven into the fabric of the community itself. Even Doran, the conservative advisor who had once raised concerns during the council meeting about Cade's personal affections, distracting from his leadership duties, eventually approached her with a grudging measure of respect, acknowledging that the Alpha's judgment and focus had only sharpened since their courtship began, rather than weakening as he had originally feared. Through it all, Cade continued growing more comfortable expressing his feelings directly, rather than relying solely on private conversations with his wolf, though Mara noticed with quiet amusement that certain flustered murmurs still occasionally slipped through during particularly nervous moments, evidence that some habits, however endearing, proved harder to fully abandon than others. One crisp evening, as they sat together near a warm fire in the pack hall's private quarters reserved for the Alpha's use, Cade turned to her with an expression she had come to recognize as one preceding something significant. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about how far we have come since that first dangerous night in the forest. From a chance encounter with a rogue wolf, to uncovering your extraordinary gift, to finally speaking honestly about feelings we both struggled to voice at first. It has been quite a journey," Mara agreed softly, leaning into the warmth of his presence beside the crackling fire. "I find myself wanting to take the next step in that journey," Cade continued, his voice carrying a nervous energy she found utterly charming, given how far his confidence had grown since their earliest, most flustered encounters. "Though I confess, even now, some small part of me wishes to consult my wolf before proceeding." Mara laughed warmly, understanding immediately the teasing reference to his earlier habits. "Perhaps this once," she said gently, "you might allow yourself to speak from your own heart, without needing your wolf's guidance to find the courage." Cade smiled, drawing a steadying breath before continuing. "Mara, these past months have shown me a happiness I never imagined possible, given the weight and isolation of my position. You have seen me at my most vulnerable, understood parts of myself I never intended to reveal to anyone, and rather than using that understanding against me, you have only deepened my trust and affection for you. I do not wish to imagine a future without you standing beside me." The sincerity and vulnerability in his words, spoken directly and without hesitation now, filled Mara's heart with a warmth deeper than any she had experienced throughout their entire courtship. "You will not have to imagine such a future," she said softly, "because I have no intention of going anywhere. My heart belongs here, beside you, for as long as you will have me." As the fire crackled warmly beside them, and the first snow of the season began drifting softly outside the pack hall's windows, Mara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, grateful beyond measure for the extraordinary gift that had first revealed Cade's gentle heart to her, and even more grateful for the honest, open love that had grown from that unusual beginning into something neither of them could imagine living without. Winter arrived in full force over the following weeks, blanketing Blackthorn territory in thick layers of snow that transformed the forest into a quiet, glittering landscape. Despite the harsh weather, preparations within the pack hall grew increasingly elaborate as news spread that Cade intended to formally claim Mara before the entire assembled pack, a ceremony steeped in tradition that would mark the beginning of their official union in the eyes of every wolf within the territory. Mara stood in a small chamber adjoining the great hall, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and nervous anticipation as Livia helped her prepare for the ceremony ahead. The older healer, who had watched this unlikely courtship blossom from its earliest, uncertain beginnings, could not help the proud smile tugging at her lips as she adjusted the delicate embroidery along the sleeves of Mara's ceremonial dress. "I still remember the night you came home with your dress torn and dirt smudged across your cheek," Livia said fondly, rambling about the Alpha King walking you home after a rogue attack. "I never imagined that encounter would lead to this." "Neither did I," Mara admitted, smoothing the soft fabric nervously. "Everything about this journey has surprised me, from the very beginning." "Are you frightened?" Livia asked gently, sensing the nervous energy radiating from her apprentice. "A little," Mara confessed. "But mostly, I am simply overwhelmed with happiness. I never expected to find someone who understood me so completely, who accepted every strange, unusual part of who I am, without hesitation." Livia squeezed her hand affectionately. "He is fortunate to have found you as well, my dear. Whatever unusual circumstances brought the two of you together, it is clear the bond between you runs deep and true." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Garrick's familiar voice called through the wood, informing them the ceremony was ready to begin. Mara took a steadying breath, allowing Livia to guide her toward the entrance of the great hall, where the assembled pack waited in respectful silence for the formal proceedings to commence. The great hall had been transformed for the occasion, adorned with winter greenery and flickering candlelight that cast a warm, golden glow across the gathered wolves, filling every available space. At the front of the room, standing before the traditional claiming stone that had witnessed countless similar ceremonies throughout Blackthorn history, Cade waited, his expression a beautiful mixture of nervous anticipation and profound joy as he watched Mara approach through the parting crowd. Gone was any trace of the flustered uncertainty that had once characterized his private conversations with his wolf regarding his feelings for her. In its place stood a man completely secure in his devotion, his amber eyes locked onto hers with unwavering warmth as she made her way toward him through the assembled pack members. When she finally reached him, Cade took her hands gently in his own, and the formal ceremony began, guided by an elder wolf who spoke the traditional words binding two souls together before the entire pack as witness. Mara listened to the familiar phrases, her heart swelling with emotion as she recited her own vows in return, promising devotion and partnership through whatever challenges the future might bring. As the ceremony reached its culmination, Cade leaned close, his voice carrying only to her ears, despite the crowded hall surrounding them. "I love you," he said simply, directly, with none of the hesitation that had once characterized his earliest attempts at expressing his feelings. Completely, and without reservation. "I love you too," Mara whispered back, her joy overflowing, as the assembled pack erupted into cheers, celebrating the formal union now sealed before them all. The celebration that followed stretched long into the winter evening, filled with music and laughter, and the warm camaraderie of a pack fully embracing their alpha's chosen mate. Mara found herself surrounded by well-wishers throughout the night, pack members, who had once regarded her with suspicion, now offering genuine congratulations and warm embraces, grateful to see their leader finally settled into the happiness he so clearly deserved. Later, as the celebration began winding down and the great hall slowly emptied of its joyful crowd, Cade found a quiet moment to steal Mara away toward a secluded corner near the hall's grand windows, where the snow continued falling softly outside, beneath a clear, star-filled sky. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, studying her face with the same gentle attentiveness that had first drawn her to him so many months ago. "More than I ever imagined possible," Mara said honestly, leaning into his warm embrace. "Though I confess, I do miss one small thing from our earlier days together." Cade raised an eyebrow curiously. "And what might that be?" "Your flustered conversations with your wolf," Mara admitted with a teasing smile. "They were rather endearing, watching you argue with yourself over the simplest matters concerning me." Cade laughed warmly, pulling her closer against the cold winter air seeping faintly through the window panes. "I suspect my wolf still has plenty to say," he said, his eyes glinting with playful mischief. "Perhaps you might still catch the occasional stray thought, now and then." As if summoned by his words, Mara caught the faintest murmur drifting from him in that very moment, quieter and far more content than any she had overheard during their earlier, uncertain courtship. She is mine now, completely and forever. I could not have asked for a better match, in this life or any other. Mara's heart swelled with joy at the warm sincerity behind his private thought, and she pressed closer against him, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment, despite the surrounding celebration still echoing faintly through the great hall. "I heard that," she whispered teasingly, glancing up to meet his surprised, delighted expression. "I suppose some habits are simply too difficult to break entirely," Cade said, laughing softly, as he pressed a tender kiss against her forehead. "Though I find I do not mind so terribly, knowing you will always understand exactly how deeply I cherish you, even in the quietest, most private corners of my heart." Outside, the snow continued falling gently over Blackthorn territory, blanketing the peaceful forest in pristine white beneath the star-scattered winter sky, while inside, the warm glow of the great hall, Mara and Cade stood together, their extraordinary journey, from a dangerous chance encounter to a lifetime of devoted partnership, finally, beautifully complete.